The male ego is both a fortress and a prison, an intricate construct built over years and generations. It is not a mere feature of personality, but a pervasive force, shaping thought, action, and even identity. A man often believes he wears his ego like a garment, something he can choose to remove when the occasion demands. But the truth is more insidious. The ego weaves itself into the fabric of his being until he no longer knows where it ends and he begins. At its essence, the ego is born of survival, a remnant of ancient instincts. In the primal past, it roared to assert dominance, to claim territory, to ensure the continuation of the self. A man without ego was a man without place, without voice, without worth. But what once served as a tool of survival has now become a shackle of the mind. In the modern world, the male ego is rarely about survival. It is about validation, status, and the illusion of permanence in an impermanent world. The ego craves recognition. It thrives on the applause of others, the nods of approval, the weight of admiration. It tells a man that he must be seen, acknowledged, revered. To be invisible is to be irrelevant, and to be irrelevant is to cease to exist. And so, he chases the fleeting moments of glory, not realizing that each victory only deepens his dependence on the external world. It is a hunger that cannot be sated. A man may climb the highest mountains, earn the loudest cheers, and amass treasures beyond measure, yet his ego will whisper, "More." It will convince him that what he has achieved is insufficient, that there is always another peak, another conquest, another measure of his worth. In this endless pursuit, the ego does not allow rest. Rest, after all, would mean stillness, and in stillness lies the terrifying possibility of self-reflection. But what is the ego reflecting, if not a man's deepest fears? For all its bluster and bravado, the male ego is a delicate thing, easily bruised and quick to lash out in its defense. A careless word, a perceived slight, or even a silent gaze can threaten to unmask the vulnerability it hides. And so, it responds with defiance. It builds walls higher and thicker, all the while burying the truth that those walls were built not out of strength, but out of fear. Fear of inadequacy, fear of being forgotten, fear of being exposed as something less than the ideal it strives to project. This fear drives much of what men do. They compete, not always to win, but to prove they are not weak. They boast, not always to impress, but to drown out the doubts that echo in their minds. They seek power, not always to control others, but to convince themselves they are not powerless. Yet the ego is not entirely a villain. It has built civilizations, driven innovation, and inspired great works of art and philosophy. It pushes men to excel, to overcome, to leave a legacy. The ego is the fire that fuels ambition, and without ambition, humanity might still dwell in caves. The same ego that builds can also destroy. It turns brother against brother, nation against nation. It blinds a man to his own humanity and the humanity of others. Consider the paradox. The man who appears most confident is often the one most controlled by his ego. His strength is a performance, a carefully constructed act to conceal the cracks beneath the surface. And the man who seems humble, he may simply have found subtler ways to feed his ego, through acts of service, quiet intelligence, or unspoken superiority. The ego does not disappear, it evolves. It requires a courage far greater than that of physical feats. A man must face himself, his raw, unfiltered self, and confront the possibility that his worth is not tied to what he achieves or how others perceive him. To strip it away feels like death, and in a sense, it is the death of illusion. But what lies beyond the ego? What remains when the veil is lifted? At first, there is emptiness. The silence is deafening, the void unrelenting. Without the ego's constant chatter, a man may feel lost, unmoored. Without the need to prove, he can simply be. Without the need to compare, he can embrace his own journey. Few men reach this understanding, For the ego does not surrender willingly. It will fight to the end, using every tool at its disposal, pride, anger, despair, to keep its hold. And so, the male ego persists, a force both creative and destructive, both necessary and expendable. A man must learn to walk the fine line between embracing it and transcending it. For to live entirely in its grip is to live a life of perpetual hunger, but to reject it entirely is to risk losing the fire that makes him human. The journey is long and the answers are elusive. But perhaps the greatest wisdom lies in the willingness to ask the questions. Who am I beyond my achievements? What is left when the applause fades? What is the worth of a man who needs no recognition to stand tall? Perhaps, in those questions, the ego finds its quiet redemption.